do we need to do intros?
No.
Might as well for the
Unless
video.
you want to do it
For
for
the video.
fun.
Okay,
Yeah.
Jennifer Levine, she, her, Prime Minister, friend Sty.
Everett Torrey, any pronouns, whatever the other one is, yeah.
Zach Fleisler, they, them pronouns, leader of opposition.
Adrian, he, him, MO.
Alright.
Okay.
Wait, can I do the formalities?
Please do the form. Does that mean I have to go back to sit down?
Okay, I call this court to order and I call upon the Prime Minister to deliver a speech not to exceed 7 minutes and 30-second grace. Here.
Okay.
Thank you.
One sec. I lied. Okay, we're
Explain
doing.
for the video that's an exposition round.
It's an exposition round, which means that we're not doing it for the points. We're just doing it because it'll be fun. The motion is: this House believes that the global poor would be justified in a communist revolution. Is that all?
Yeah.
To say? Okay. Great. I'm just gonna do top of case and then gov case. Is anyone not ready? Okay, amazing. Start my time now. So we're gonna define this house as a rational actor, and we're gonna say like the global poor is like everyone, right? There are poor people in every single country. They're all revolting. Presumably there's like a global revolution that's gonna end in communism all over. We think for this to happen, the global poor need to agree to do this. It has to be a group decision. Now, we think, why is this going to be a philosophy case that we're going to be giving you here on Gov? Because the word justified in the motion implies that it ought to happen morally. Simply put, this is all about theory. This is all about if the global poor revolting is something that is justified. Basically, this is as moral an act as it gets to be. We are going to argue under many philosophies because no one philosophy is right. In the spirit of treating each other's philosophies as equal and believing in each other's humanity, which we think is a key tenet of both debating and existing, we believe any of these philosophies is valid and therefore
POI.
should be talked about. No.
POC.
Pause time.
How under your framework, how would you weigh like winning different philosophies against each other, and how do you determine, let's say if you win 2, we win 2, which philosophies are more valid to decide a ballot?
Am I allowed to answer anything? Or
No.
am I? Yeah, so.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, I can?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, the essential idea is that we're going to have a lot of moral frameworks, and so whichever ones they're just more drawn to, they can do. If you guys want to do meta-ethics, you can, but our point is just that, like, in general, because all these moral philosophies have been argued for a long time, it's probably the case that, like, some of them are true, and so we think that it's just a better idea to, like, support a lot of different moral philosophies to consider more things in a debate round.
So you're only going to go for one at the end, though?
Well,
No,
not
we're going to go
necessarily.
for, it just depends on whatever they want at the end of the day.
I think the theory of this is that like we're respecting like all of these like different like ideas because like everyone's like respecting each other as a human. So like we're considering all of them, we're talking about all of them, we're not considering
Like any one
thing
person
as
could
not.
use any of these philosophies, so we just want to, like, respect all of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, great. I'll restart my time. Now, so if we can prove that in more cases than not this is a moral action, we believe that we should win this round. Also, just like talking about different philosophies is more interesting, so we think we should be doing that. Okay, our contentions. 1, deontology. We said that making a choice, agency in and of itself is good. The fact that the global poor are coming together and making this choice means that they are exercising agency. Why is agency good? 3 reasons. 1, you can't have any kind of progress in society if you don't have actors to do that progress. 2, you can't have any moral code if you don't have actors that follow it or don't follow it. So without this, society is going to descend into chaos. And 3, agency is a priori here because you can't have any kind of philosophy or like measure of like how you ought to act without actors within it to like choose to do those acts. So we think that the really important thing here is that on our side, the global poor are exercising agency, and in response to something, we think that on that you can vote for said government. Second contention on util. We think this is better for people. A few reasons why capitalism is bad. 1, it assigns arbitrary value to individuals. It quantifies human life. This leads to things like depersonalization, dehumanization of people. It's a lot easier to justify abuses of power, abuses of individuals like slavery. 2, it puts profits as the end goal. It leads to this mentality of the ends justify the means, which means that a lot of immoral acts in between are going to happen. It basically allows for sketchy behavior and sacrifices along the way, which we think are probably going to be a net bad and immoral. 3, it ignores societal nuances about class, race, gender, etc. We think that certain people are going to get ahead and considered like quote unquote better, even though they might have systemic advantages, but we think that those nuances get erased in a capitalist world where again you're only looking at the end result, you're not looking at any of the context in the middle. Then, harms to the environment. We think that when in capitalism you're putting humans first into the natural world, in an anthropological society, it's vital that we consider the morality and the quality of life of like all living beings to some extent, meaning that in capitalism, when you emphasize profit and human gain, then you ignore the environment. We get the impact of climate change, and also just like we should be considering like the natural world, like we're not the only things that are living on this earth. So what is the point here? We think that when you get full world communism, we think like the ideology here is good and therefore justified because we're acting in response to all of these horrible things that capitalism has called for. Basically, we think that this is a reaction that's justified because of all these harms. We think that any kind of attempt to get some sort of change, like a communist revolution, is going to be a net good because capitalism is bad. Okay, third contention is about the social contract theory. when people agree to be governed, they give up some of their liberties for the sake of certain benefits. These benefits in the status quo are not being met for the global poor. So as an example, like in America, a lot of people don't have healthcare, the welfare, like they're starving, their basic human needs aren't being provided for by the government, and therefore the people have a right as citizens to revolt. The poor actually have an obligation, if the government is not fulfilling their needs, to do something about it. So this is a good act as citizens. Like morally, we think as like a political actor, as someone who's being governed, it is your duty to do something if you don't think that your needs are being met, if you are like giving something and you're not getting back out of that. So we think that as citizens, the moral thing to do here is to follow the social contract, to adhere to it, and therefore to revolt. Finally, our last contention is about Aristotelianism / Hegel's dialectics. Okay, what does this mean? We think that this is moral under the law of means because it allows for people to be generous, giving to the poor and supporting each other, which is a virtue because we're going against capitalism. And then it also allows people to avoid the vices of selfishness and constantly trying to scam each other out of capitalism. So basically what you're gonna see here is like when you go and when we're like trying to like fulfill like the goal of like having a communist revolution, basically people are going to start thinking about like being generous. They're going to start basically prioritizing these ideas instead of the vices. We think that's gonna be a net good when people aren't like so focused on like these bad things in order to get something like personal gain out of it. We think that when you're focusing on yourself and then you're focusing on like other people and you're not just thinking about like what's like how am I going to get on top, we think that's going to be a net benefit. Under Hegel's dialectics, we feed into Aristotelianism. What is this? By allowing people to experience more things, we allow people to come to their own conclusions over time about what they do and do not want in their life. So basically, we live in like a generally capitalist society. So if we have a communist revolution, people are going to get to experience communism. No. People are going to get to experience communism. Why do we think this is good? We think it's a really important thing for people to be able to experience different kinds of like rule, different economic methods. Why is this? Because that difference, like the disruption in your monotony and like the regularity of your life is what gives life meaning. Variety like allows for change. So as an example, like if you worked in a cubicle and lived the same day over and over, there's no meaning in your life. You get meaning from the things that change in your life. You get meaning from the disruption. So we think that it's a net benefit for people to have a disruption in their life, to have that change. One, because a more meaningful world is good and they're going to have more meaning in this world. You're going to have more fulfilled people because they're going to have differences. Two, the more variety you get, the more we experience the spectrum of vices and virtues, and therefore we can actually move ourselves towards the middle, or like what people think is like the net like best thing. So we think that having more experiences is going to like allow more people to understand like what do I prefer? But we think that you're not going to understand like what you prefer unless you actually experience both worlds. We think that's not happening in the status quo, so you have to allow people to experience both. And then finally, on the doctrine of the mean, we think that like getting this balance is like really important. We think that like going to the extremes is not great, but we see that like on-site government only if you have the chance to go to the middle. You don't have any of those chances. On-site opposition, the fulfillment of the global poor is what's really important here because they're fighting for what they believe in. We would argue that in this round, we're going to care about the poor the most because they've been marginalized for a really long time. So we're going to weigh their wants, their needs, what's benefiting them the most above everything else. So what do we get here in this fourth contention? Basically, we get this idea that not only is it good for like the general like public to like adapt to this communist idea because they're going to be just more generous, kind people, but we also think specifically for the poor, they're going to have a better life because not only are they going to like not suffer as much, but they're also going to be able to experience different things. They're going to get meaning in their life, and we think that's going to be a huge net benefit. So let's go over why this matters in like this idea of like a philosophical round, right? So again, read the motion. This house believes the global poor would be justified in a communist revolution. So if we can prove to you that there are more reasons why the global poor are justified than they're not, we will win this debate. So what do we give you here? We give you a political reason why they are justified in this because of the social contract theory. We give you these like tangible benefits about like why capitalism is bad and why it harms people. So there's a duty here to revolt, to improve the quality of lives of all these people. And then you also get these theoretical like philosophical arguments basically about why acting on agency is a priori in this round, because without exercising your own agency, you're not really being like exercising your like existence as a person. And we believe that if you're not exercising agency, then you're not able to set any kind of philosophical code, any kind of moral code. For all those reasons, could not be prouder to propose.
Okay, thank the PMC for her eloquent remarks, and I call upon the leader of opposition to deliver a speech not to exceed 8 minutes and 30-second grace. Here.
Oh my god.
Oh yeah.
The stand has arrived.
Ooh, okay. Is everyone ready?
Yeah, wait, is it down here?
Okay. The order's gonna go their case, our case. Or, yeah, their case, our case. Okay. Our time will start now. We agree with their definitions and framework. Just one thing on their framework, their definitions and stuff, but that's one thing on their framework for the round. I would like to say that this is pretty unresolvable because they read 4 different domains of philosophy, but then make the framework if they can prove that in more cases than not it is moral. What happens if you split the difference? They literally read you an unresolvable framework that triggers unresolvability. I think you should make them either instantly vote off at that point, or go the other direction and make them specify one framework and then justify the other ones under that one framework and make their own meta-ethic analysis as to which one matters. Otherwise, they just read 4 different domains, then could go for one in the PMR, and that triggers a massive strat skew for us. But let's go on deontology. I think that they basically contextualize the action in a vacuum, which is really, really, really bad. Even Immanuel Kant would not say that me actively making a decision to violate someone else's autonomy is good, because even though that is expressing agency, it has the actual action in of itself also violates other principles such as autonomy. So what principles does this violate? We're going to go into this on our case, but you're not only making a choice, you're making a choice to engage in violent revolution because of prior negatives that have been done to you. You're making 2 choices here. First, the choice to engage in violent revolution, which we would argue is the opposite of a categorical imperative, because if everyone engaged in violent revolution, then no one would ever be able to engage in violent revolution because everyone would be dead. But then second, we would say that fundamentally responding to pain with more violence is also not a categorical imperative, because if everybody did that, then again, we would all be gone. Then on utilitarianism, realize one big thing. Their entire link is that this action is justified because it works. Fundamentally, all of their utilitarian links are predicated on the fact that they are going to achieve global communism, and they're going to therefore be able to solve for all of the negs of capitalism. But then realize that most of the negs of capitalism they read are philosophical negs, and therefore shouldn't be categorized under utilitarianism because they don't actually increase harm. But let's go neg by neg. First, they said that it assigns an arbitrary value to individuals and devalues life. We would tell you that 1, this also happens under communism and can potentially happen more because people can feel alienated under a larger bureaucracy that tells them what they can't do and what jobs they have. Second, prioritizes profits as the end goal is not a utilitarian impact. It literally doesn't justify anything and doesn't lead to any harms. There's no pain or pleasure coming out of it. Third, they say that ignores societal nuances about class, race, and gender. Again, we can say 1, there's no pain, 2, no guarantee that people are going to solve it, and 3, violent revolution usually leads to reactionary attitudes building up. So if you want to talk about ignoring class, race, and gender, you're going to get more oppression. And then on harms to the environment, we're going to talk about this on our case, but we have a pretty nice thing. Then, on social contract theory, we would say that the vast majority of things they read aren't violations of the social contract. The social contract as defined by Hobbes, which justifies violent revolution, we agree it does. However, what the contract actually is that individuals give up liberty in order for security, not in order for healthcare, welfare, and food. Those are not guaranteed human rights that the state is forced to provide. This doesn't justify violent revolution under the social contract, but even besides that, we would tell you that violent revolution probably doesn't give you any healthcare, welfare, or even this food if you don't have access to it, or the revolution isn't successful and can lead to more harm in the long term. But then, under the Hegelian dialectic, there's a few problems. First, you can access all of this in the status quo, which is I can move to Cuba, I can move to China, I can get a range of experiences. However, in the status quo, I can actually get a wider range of experiences than in their world, where everybody in their perfect world is forced into only experiencing communism. They just make another sole experience that people can have. In 2 generations, no one will even experience capitalism anymore, it turns themselves. But then on the doctrine of the mean, realize that you don't actually end up centralizing anywhere in the middle. You're only going to breed people getting angry about the system or wanting the previous system even more. But let's go into our case because it's going to be a little bit dense. We'll start off on our first contention on deontology, realizing that responding to being fucked over with more violence is only going to beget more violence. This is a categorical imperative. You can't universalize this, because if Adrian punched me and then I proceed to punch Adrian back, if everyone did that, then who's going to be punching anyone anymore? At that point, we're just all getting punched and there's no one left to punch. This means that the action fundamentally under deontology is not valid because you can't universalize it. But then realize the mechanism for rebellion is violence, and you can never be able to universalize killing, because if we kill and do violent revolution, then who's going to be left? The pragmatic implications here are devastating, because if people default to rebellion in every single situation, that's going to be bad, because you're only going to have more and more violence, especially if those rebellions are unsuccessful, and then you get crackdowns by the government, you get the people getting hurt even more. And I think this actually outweighs their case, because if we look at the fundamental justification that they use for why this revolution is justified, it's usually because it solves for the problems that the global poor suffer from right now. If we can prove that this doesn't solve those problems, it's not justified. Which leads us to contention 2, which is pragmatics. The claim that government makes is that the poor have been fucked over, therefore they're justified. What's the link? Solvency. If they have no solvency, then they literally have no link into their justification. Why will this not succeed? First off, we're willing to bite the bullet on some success somewhere if the round goes all the way to that. However, we would tell you that there's probably going to be an asymmetric level of success, specifically between the developed world and countries like America, that not only have this massive institutionalized hatred of communism, perpetuated by the Red Scare, perpetuated by the middle class thinking communism is bad. Even the global poor in America hate communism. communism. At that point, what you're going to be reaching is that revolution is going to be violently put down. That's going to spur a hatred and communism from America. We're going to get a second Red Scare where they're invading everyone and stopping all of these fledgling communist states, just like we saw in the 1950s and 60s. More coup d'etats, more violent revolution, and all of these communist states are no longer going to be communist. If America has their way, they're going to go right back to authoritarianism. Then, realize that under capitalist realism, the vast majority of even the global poor probably don't even think a world beyond beyond capitalism is possible, so even if they engage in a violent communist revolution, they probably don't have a very clear goal in mind, especially because previous communist revolutions have not been very successful. This means that the end goal is probably going to be significantly worse and allows individuals to sort of seize power because you're in a violent revolution. You need to win the war against America, against China, against other sort of pseudo-capitalist states in order to establish global communism. What this means is that you're going to end up centralizing power. Why is that really bad? In order to centralize power in a violent revolution, you give people the ability to hold on to that power even after that. Sure, you're justified in engaging in a communist revolution, but what happens when that communist revolution becomes an authoritarian revolution? Does that make the original action justified? We would tell you no. Then realize this leads to long-term violence, because even if it's successful in those places, you're going to have insurgencies, little groups of the bourgeois that are existing for the very long time and are going to keep on fighting back. Then realize that it's only going to lead to long-term violence because America is going to crack down. Then let's go on to our third contention, which is even if you buy that a revolution is justified, why is a communist revolution uniquely bad? We have a few warrants here. First is going to be on poverty reduction. Let's talk about why full-blown communism is actually not what's going to be best for poverty reduction. Let's use China as an empiric. They did the full-blown communist thing. They brought in all the farmers. They brought in the peasants. They did a Maoist revolution and killed all the landlords. Did poverty get better? No. What they actually had was famine. You know when poverty did get better? Under the Dengist Restoration, when they brought in free markets, when they brought in financial investment from outside, and they were able to rise 1 billion people out of poverty. If you look at global poverty over the last 20 years and discount China, it literally has gone up. If you count China, it's gone drastically down. We tell you that's a benefit of pseudo-capitalism, which you're not going to get from a global communist revolution. Then, let's talk about innovation. Capitalism obviously breeds innovation, or even if you don't buy that, you buy that communism stunts it. Marx talks about hunting in the morning, herding cattle by night. When do you go to the lab to start innovating? Literally, you don't do that because you only end up working for what you want to do and pleasure. There's no active incentive which profit generates. Then, third, let's talk about how popular implementation of communism leads to authoritarian backsliding, because you have to get the heavy bureaucracy. You have to get these sort of political structures, and all you need is one bad egg in the basket, one bad leader, and then the entire system burns down, because then they'll never leave power. They'll never give up the ability that they have, or even if they do sort of leave power or give up, maybe the entire system collapses with them, like we see in Yugoslavia, like we saw with Mao. Then, let's talk about climate change, because what we would fundamentally tell you is that communist states have no incentive to solve for climate change and will probably make it worse due to the environmental Kuznets curve. What this tells you is that low-income countries end up having the highest sort of emissions per capita, and then have the lowest emissions per capita because they don't engage in this sort of natural extraction, they don't engage in industrialism, but then as they move to middle-income countries, they have the highest sort of emissions. This is the sort of benefit that they're even arguing that they're going to go for. However, on our side of the flow, we can skip them all the way from being low-income to high-income countries through capitalist markets and innovation, which allows them to skip the middle step where they have the highest sort of where the highest sort of pollution. But then realize that so far at this point, climate change is so far gone that even if we stop everything right now, the only way that we're going to solve for it is with innovation, carbon capture technologies, and other sorts of things that can stop this sort of existential extinction event. At the end of the day, extinction is obviously going to prereq everything on their side of the flow, because if you're dead, none of the morals matter. Thank you.
Guys, is the camera still working?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great speech, Zach. That was lovely to listen to. Oh, well, now I have to move the tables. Okay.
I thank the LOC for their eloquent remarks, and I call upon the member of government to deliver a speech not to exceed 8 minutes and a 30-second grace. Here, here.
That's me.
It is.
Why is it so heavy? Oh, because of the books. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I'm smart. I want to be centered for the camera.
Because the normal force is greater, so the
Oh my God, Adrian! Just because you're the junior taking physics doesn't mean that we all need to know. Alright. Okay.
Did we lose a judge?
No.
Oh, okay.
I just need.
Me and my minions.
Well, I have to scroll to a lot of case, so I have to figure out where I actually am.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm already here. Thank you.
Doesn't have a floor spot.
Okay. Is anybody not ready?
So ready.
In that case, I'll begin my time now. Okay, I'd like to bring out the point that in the very beginning of Zach's speech, he brings up a theory argument, in which he says that we can't run 4 different philosophies, because if we do, then that means that at the end of the day, we're going to be able to just kind of choose one, and then that's really unfair because, obviously they won't have a chance to actually talk more about it. I'd say that speed is the exact same thing. When you talk way too fast, it means that you've given way too many warrants and way too many points, such that all that Adrian has to do now is say, hey, they didn't talk about this one thing, let's really build this up in MO, and then there's an MO spike, and then LOR gets up and says, ah ha ha, therefore we win because they didn't talk about it enough, and then PMR can't do it because technically it was in the first speech, just way said too fast. I think that speed is really bad for debate, and so if you're going to vote on this theory argument, vote for mine instead, because I think that it makes it really unfair. Let's now move on. Okay, just to clarify, we're using multiple philosophies because we want to assert that meta-ethical debates in themselves are pointless, right? Like all of us, like all these like different philosophies that we've come up with, like obviously we talk about them because different people actually believe in them, right? Like clearly, why are we still arguing about them? Shouldn't we, like, if one of them was actually true, wouldn't that one just kind of win out? The entire reason why we're considering different philosophies is because that's what people do in real life. In real life, we have to consider different philosophies because we all have different philosophies. That's why we're running this, and we're not going to just choose one. We want to win on all of them, or at very least on as many of them as we can. Okay, let's move into case.
TY?
No, too much. All right. Framework, they say that it's unresolvable for domains. Look at my observation. Plus, don't lie severity, feed severity is the same thing. Okay. Under our first contention, they say that choice to engage in violent revolution is bad. I'd like to say that, first of all, categorical imperative does not actually apply here. So they say that under the categorical imperative, killing people is bad, right? I think that because it's a large group of people and there's only two groups, it's one group taking over the other. So in any scenario that there's one large group taking over the other and there are the only two groups that exist in the world, actually under categorical imperative it's fine because agency still is resolved, first of all. And second of all, I think that it isn't necessarily going to be violent. Now, I know what they're going to say. They're going to say, no, obviously the capitalists are going to like kill all of the communists and or vice versa. I'd like to say that if it's all poor people, there are plenty of countries in which many people are poor. And so if literally everyone, gets up and says, hey guys, we're all just going to be communists now, that doesn't necessarily mean that death will happen. Could it happen? Yes. But under deontology, is it okay? Therefore, because it doesn't necessarily happen, also yes. Yippee. First point is defended. Nice. Under our second contention, they talk about how more capitalism is, negs are philosophical and stuff. I think that, utilitarianism, I think that under util we're still actually justified because under their side, they're the status quo. The people who are poor are still going to be overall oppressed, right? You either vote for the side that maybe has a change, even if it's unlikely, or you vote for the side that has absolutely no change and they're still oppressed. Clearly, there's one side here that actually has the change that will lead towards some benefit. Under util, some benefit is obviously better than none. Okay, they then talk about how the end goal doesn't lead to any harms, no pain or pleasure and stuff. I think that minimizing suffering is our end goal here, and I think that that's pretty clear. And I think that at least doing something to minimize your suffering is obviously a good thing under util. And I also think, by the way, that the entire point of this is the idea of fulfillment, right? Like, why is anyone going to fight if at the end of the day they just know that they're going to die because the big capitalist with a big gun is going to shoot you, right? It's the idea of fulfillment. You have to do something. If you don't do anything, then it's the life in a cubicle, in which you're living the same life over and over again, and it's oppressing you over and over again, and you do nothing about it. They're justified in this action because they have been oppressed, and because they need to do something to actually get the fulfillment of fighting against something. This is the reason why, people die for their art or whatever it might be, or die for a cause, right? Same idea applies here. They're totally justified in doing so because they have been oppressed. That isn't really under util, it's more under deont, but nonetheless. Okay. Under the third point, they said that the social contract theory only justifies violent revolutions because individuals are giving up their liberties and stuff. I don't really understand what they mean when they're interpreting social contract theory here. The idea that we're rather saying is that, if by being a part of the government we shouldn't, kill, and therefore, under social contract theory we shouldn't kill because, it's immoral because the government says so, if you cease to be part of the government, any, thing that the government says when it comes to their philosophies kind of doesn't apply to you anymore. And so you only have your own philosophies to go by. I think, therefore, under, a morality thing and, a kind of, epistemological humility thing, which is a funny word that Adrian understands that none of you will. The basic idea is essentially that as long as people in general, as long as there's someone who believes that this is the right thing to do, that's a totally valid philosophy and it is justified because they believe that it's right. Okay. Under our fourth contention, they talk about how everyone forces without experience communism bad. I have no clue what that says, so I'm just going to kind of move on. Or rather, they say that it's accessible in the status quo and that you're going to move to a communist country and stuff. I don't think that this is actually true. I think that if you're poor, you're probably not able to move to a communist country, first of all. And second of all, I think that the entire idea here is that you're disrupting something, right? The idea is that you need to get more experiences to be able to figure out where you want to be in the middle. And I think that as it stands, people haven't experienced communism and won't be able to unless there's an actual revolution to do so. I think that the result of that is if you want more experiences and to be able to actually make more decisions about your life, more experiences are generally a good thing. That's the Hegel's dialectics thing here, and it flows into Aristotelianism because the entire idea is that you need to be, the law of means is that you need to know know the extremes to get the middle. I think that like you actually allow people to experience firsthand how communism is by actually allowing it to happen, right? Like everyone says communism is good in theory but bad in practice. How do you know? You don't. You haven't lived in communism. Let's have communism, live in it a bit, and then we can make more decisions based on that. That's Hegel's dialectics, and the idea in itself is that by having more experiences, anytime that you do that, that is justified. Hence, we think that's justified here under their philosophy. Okay, let's get into their points. And there's quite a lot here. I know that I'm not gonna be able to get over it all. Look at my speed K. Okay, under Dion, they talk about, or not speed K, but it's like speed theory, but it's kind of from a speed K that I did in policy. Long story, it's speed nonetheless. Okay, under deont, they say that violence begets violence, and therefore this isn't deontological. Once again, you don't know this for sure. Violence does not necessarily beget violence here. There's no reason why it actually does. They just say like, oh, certainly people are gonna die, right? And then they give the example of like Maoist revolutions, or like stuff that happened in Russia. That's not necessarily true. There have been revolutions in which the government just kind of leaves, or like moves somewhere else, or whatever it might be, right? I think that that could happen, and such, it's there. I still want to get through a lot. I'm sorry, I would take them, but nonetheless. Okay, so I think that overall, also, like, if you don't buy deont, I think that at the end of the day, it's one more philosophy, and I think that, like, I know that it's like a strategic thing here, and this is an argument against us that, like, if they lose one, then, like, we also need to lose all the other ones. I think that, like, it's better if we win here, and I think that we do, but even if we don't, I think that you can look at those other ones and still, like, consider the fact that they're not considering many more philosophies and just kind of, like, shutting all of them with this blanket statement. Okay, under pragmatics, they said the poor are struggling, but there's absolutely no solvency. There is some solvency, right? If like, okay, if I have a country with 80% of the population being poor, which are some countries, by the way, then I think that, like, you can overpower people with numbers at the end of the day, which is a very dark way of putting it, but you can get the idea, essentially, which is that, like, or in countries in which, like, almost literally everyone is poor, they're actually able to take it over because, you know, they can just vote or whatever it might be, or do some kind of revolution in the sense that, like, they switch the different kind of, like, system by which they're governing. I think that actually this does have solvency, first of all, and second of all, even if it doesn't have solvency, at least you're doing something. At least you're able to fulfill yourself and gain fulfillment, which is the point of life. We're all doing something for the sake of our own principles and values. If it is your principle and value to no longer be oppressed, which is pretty understandable, you are totally justified in doing something about it, right? We think that their side, once again, is the status quo. Nothing changes. On our side, at least we have something changing. Okay, they talk about how there's asymmetrical levels of success within different countries, and America's probably going to be less successful at all these things. I don't see why this matters. Once again, it's better to at least like have the fulfillment of trying. Next, they talk about like the Red Scare is going to happen, and like that's rough. We don't like the Red Scare, boo. I think that this one, once again, isn't necessarily going to happen, especially if like you can imagine this all happening at once. If the idea is that like the entire global poor is doing it at once, I don't think that this is going to be a Red Scare. I think it's going to be a consideration about what all of the global poor are saying, right? If all the global poor are kind of like in this together, I think that it's actually going to be more of a discussion about whether or not we should do communism, and then it will take over and probably have less death at the end of the day. But we don't actually know how this is going to play out because, you know, it's kind of difficult to imagine literally every single poor person in the world like getting together like on a phone chat or something and being like, let's do communism. So I think that it's more in like a general idea of like a normative debate style, in which is like, should they be generally justified in doing so? I think that Prague here is really difficult to use in general because we don't really know what this looks like, but I think that on net under Prague, because they're at least going to get some benefit, that's the reason why we can use util here anyways, right? Because it's guaranteed that something will change versus nothing, and that's the idea under like util where it's like at least there's something that changes and that's like the benefit that you get. Okay. They talk about how past communist revolutions are not successful. Some of them are, so ouch. Let's see, like any communism that exists today had to come from somewhere, and that's my time.
I thank the member of government for the eloquent remarks and call upon the member of opposition to deliver a speech not to exceed 8 minutes and 30 seconds grace period. So overwhelmingly tall. I feel intimidated.
Are you use the table too, Adrian?
Of course.
Do you always do that? That's so cute. I love that.
Everyone always uses the table when they debate with me. So.
I do.
If at any point
I
I'm going too fast, I generously encourage you to say so. That being said, is everyone good to go? I'll start my time on my first word. Side government gives you like 6 different moral frameworks and manages to lose under all of them. Let's talk about why that's the case. First of all, on moral grounding, Everett gives you something about speed theory. How are we supposed to moderate our speed if we don't know we're going too fast? Say we're going too fast, you didn't do that, should have done that. Then they say vote for our theory instead. I think theory is stupid, I don't like it, so let's just move on past theory and talk about why we win on the flow. So then they say meta-ethics is stupid, we have to consider different philosophies. First of all, I just don't think the claim that all philosophies are made equal is true. I think that, say, social Darwinism or some sort of philosophy that justifies, like, the killing of infants is probably worse than other social philosophies. I think that it is imperative that we actually retain a sense of being able to compare different moral systems so that we can indeed make claims when we see someone do something totally immoral. If it is the case that all moral systems are created equal, then we can come up with some moral system, which is that, like, op should always win the debate, and they can come up with one that says gov should always win the debate, and then we have nothing to do, and that sort of paralyzes everything, and I don't think that's good. But even if you buy this, they still lose all their frameworks, so it's okay. First of all, let's talk about deontology. They run, like, essentially Walmart deontology, saying that a certain action will have deontologically good impacts, and hence is somehow deontologically good. So that's not how deontology works. First of all, that's just prescriptively the case. Deontology cares about the action itself, not the consequences. But here's the prescriptive warrant, right? There are an infinite number of conceivable consequences of every action. Insofar as deontology says that you should evaluate an action by universalizing those consequences, you can't universalize infinity and then make a choice based on that, because there are infinite possible grounds on which you could make a choice, and clearly you therefore can't make a choice. You therefore only care about the action itself. So even if you buy that this results in more agency or something like that, it doesn't matter. But then, what else does Everett say here? Everett says the categorical imperative doesn't apply. There's only two groups. I don't care that there's only two groups, neither does Kant. Second of all, you can frame every debate as only having two groups. It can be like you and the rest of the world. But also, they don't respond to the brilliant analysis Fleisler gives you, which is that rebellion itself isn't universalizable. Rebellion is defined in reference to an existing order. If everyone were in a state of rebellion, there would be no existing order in which to rebel in the first place. This is an LO. It's not responded to. They can't respond to it later. Okay, then Everett says, oh, it doesn't mean that there's such violence. First of all, yeah, in the like 0.001% chance there's not violence, sure, they win the round 0.001% of the time, but I also think you must have violence here. We know that there are countries in which there's an entrenched authoritarian power who will respond violently. Think like, I don't know, every single authoritarian crackdown that's ever happened in history. I just don't see any good mechanization from the other side as to why this would happen peacefully, short of saying, oh, it might happen. I don't think that's good analysis. Then let's talk about utilitarianism. First, let's evaluate the utilitarian state of communism itself. Clearly, they talk about the harms of capitalism whilst not evaluating the benefits of communism. This loses them util outright. At best, they can claim that in specifically capitalist countries, they have a utilitarian obligation to turn to communism. Importantly, by not covering the other kinds of countries that exist, they therefore cannot make the claim that there is a utilitarian basis for a revolution in those other countries, which means that they therefore cannot make the claim that the global poor is deserving of this, insofar as not every poor person in the world lives under capitalism, meaning their utilitarian analysis doesn't work here. But even if you buy their utilitarian analysis, I think our utilitarianism analysis clearly outweighs here. Okay, so what does Everett say? Everett says we are in the status quo where the poor are oppressed, at least Gov has some chance of benefit. Okay, you can say that anything has some chance of doing something good. Every action has a non-zero chance in resulting in something else. I can make waffles in the morning, and there's presumably some subset of the world where that leads to nuclear war by some extended chance of probabilities. The very fact that exists doesn't really mean much. I don't think we should just throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks in regards to global revolutions. Then they say, oh, they're justified because they're oppressed. Once again, we ask the question, what is the link into justification? We say it's solvency. We say they don't prove solvency. Then they try and link it to solvency. They say, oh, 80% of the population is poor, therefore it'll work. Sadly, we don't determine revolutions by percentage of the population participating in them. We actually succeed by their ability to overturn existing order. We think that they actually don't engage with the analysis we give you as to why that's unlikely to happen. Why is that the case? We say, okay, sure, even if it's the case that in some countries 80% of the population is poor, you don't need most of the population, you need power to win a revolution, right? We think that the status quo, whatever structures exist in the first place, have power. They have state power, they have guns, they have weapons, they have an army, which means that sure, even the poor can uprise, but there are means by which they can be put down, which we think are these violent mechanisms. We give you that in LO, right? We also think that necessarily the poor are always not going to be able to do this as well, i.e. if you're poor, you can't afford a tank or something like that. We also think that furthermore, at the point at which this is 80% of the population, good luck organizing all of those people. It's hard enough to organize a debate tournament. government. I don't think that works. Then they say, oh, why does it matter if the US doesn't have this? I think in conceding that this won't happen in the US, they also lose this on a second level, which is to say, Fleisler gives you this brilliant analysis as to why, even if it's the case that in some countries this ends up succeeding, the US now is radicalized against communism and now goes and does interventions like they've been doing for the last, I don't know, like 70 years, which means that even if they get temporary solvency, in the long term they end up getting rid of that solvency. The only utilitarian good that's come out of that is the fact that, like, oh, we like did something and then a bunch of people died. That's probably not good. Now let's talk about contract theory. First of all, contract theory is just utter rubbish in the beginning. It assumes that you can consent into living in a government in the first place, which just is completely nonsensical, right? So where would you consent into living in a government? I think that, like, when you're born, you probably can't consent into living in a state by virtue of the fact that you were, like, born like 5 seconds ago and probably don't have any like intellectual capacity to actually make that choice. Later on, if you say make this choice like later on in your life when you've developed, I think you've already been biased towards living where you are by virtue of the fact that, like, I don't know, it's not so easy to say, oh, I actually don't consent into living in this government and like move somewhere else. That clearly doesn't work. Any sort of geographical consent by virtue if you are living there clearly doesn't operate. I don't think contract theory is axiomatically good. Even if it does exist, I still don't think they win under it, right? Fleisler gives you this good analysis that social contract theory doesn't include this, and the social contract theory says that you should do this when you have no other available options. What about, like, I don't know, voting communists into government? There are clearly other methods of recourse here. Contract theory says that as a last resort, you are justified in this revolution. They haven't proven why this is a last resort. Finally, let's talk about Hegel's dialectics. I think there's 3 levels on which this is wrong. The first level is that I just don't think experience gives people meaning. Like, I think that actually routines give people meaning because they allow you to actually define a way in which you live your life, and through that definition of how you live your life, you're actually able to feel as though you have a cohesive sense of yourself in the world, which is to say, if you keep doing different things every single day and never have a routine, I don't think you're going to feel fulfilled because you don't feel like you have an identity. That's why the premise is wrong. Even if you buy the premise, their more experience claim is odd. There is an infinite number of new things you can experience in any world. It's unclear why their set of experiences is better or indeed different than ours. Fleisler gives you the claim that you can do this. Even under capitalism, there are new things you can experience. Like, I don't know, go live in the Rocky Mountains. It's unclear why one is better or worse than the other. Finally, on virtue ethics, I don't think there's a large delta in terms of how this affects the virtue of the poor, because they probably already have sympathy towards other by virtue of being poor. They can sympathize with other poor people. I think it actually pushes everyone else towards being less virtuous. You probably have less virtue when people like violently put down a rebellion. You probably have less virtue when like the middle class or upper class is radicalized and angry at certain groups of people. That's not very virtuous. They say you need more experiences to be able to locate the middle. Clearly that's nonsensical because there's no end to this, which is to say that there's no point at which you stop needing to experience more to be able to locate the middle, because if this were true, then you would always want to experience more because you will never have been able to experience everything you possibly could have experienced, which means that there's no end, which means that you infinitely experience new things and are never able to actually get to locating the middle. That's why that doesn't work. For all of those reasons, they lose under all of their frameworks, and I could not be prouder to oppose.
I thank the MO for his eloquent remarks, and I call upon the leader of opposition to deliver a speech not to exceed 4 minutes and 30-second grace. Here.
All right, everyone ready?
Yes.
Okay. And my time will start now. At the top, let's clear up our advocacy and why you're already going to be voting opposition. You've heard many times that we're voting for the status quo, but you're voting against their advocacy. That's just all we're saying. The poor can be justified in voting people into office and doing infinitely many other things. The only thing that we inside opposition have to prove is that a violent communist revolution is not one of them. So, why are you not going to be looking at 2 of the domains that they talk about? Because they bring in 4 different ethics to start this round. 2 of them go clean conceded out of the MG. First, you're not going to be looking at the social contract because security is the only thing that the social contract guarantees. If you lose security by the state, then you can engage in violent revolution. They don't read you any warrants about security in the first 2 speeches. Don't let them link into that now. Contract is out of there. But then the dialectic, they miss the largest warrant, which is fundamentally, if you switch the global system, even in their perfect world, from global capitalism to global communism, after 1 generation, you have no one that's even experienced global capitalism anymore, and you're back in the exact same situation that they started in, which is only knowing one thing and not being able to do anything about it. So let's look at the last 2 domains here of deontology and utilitarianism and why it's a clean opposition ballot on both of them. First, you're always going to want to look to utilitarianism first, because if everyone is dead, or if the revolution doesn't succeed, then they don't get a link into any of their deontological impacts. Fundamentally, you have to be alive and be able to take choices, be a rational actor in order to make actor decisions. And let's look at utilitarianism, because as Adrian tells you, they can see the most important link that we read here, which is that there's an asymmetric level of success all around the world, even if 80% of one country is the global poor and they can rise up and take power, which we tell you they won't, because their government still has guns, artillery, landmines, and the ability to crack down on them. But even if they do, America most definitely will not. I read you unique warrants as to why America will not, whether it be the fact that even the poor in America do not support communism, even the fact that the middle class will never support it. That means that America will be successful, and we go right back to our global tirade against communism, which is always going to be more devastating. What this means is that what their actions actually result in is authoritarian governments being put into place in these communist nations where they're suffering and they're only going to have worse quality of life. It is terrible. This is always going to come first on a meta-ethical level, because you're always going to want to prefer utilitarianism over deontology for a few reasons. The first is going to just be that utilitarianism is fundamentally resolvable. There's an infinite amount of things that they can say. There's an infinite amount of levels. Yeah.
I think that the meta-ethical weighing here is kind of like a new argument as for like why one is better than the other, if that makes sense.
I think I'm extending Adrian's thing about like why deontology you can use like the. I think I'm mostly just extending Adrian's analysis about your Walmart deontology and their free.
It's also just
Why are you calling them Walmart tags?
it's also just weighing. Meta ethics just happens to be the language in which we
Yeah,
weigh.
yeah. No, it is also weighing.
If you want to call it weighing, it's up to the judge's discretion.
Okay, judge's discretion there. Okay.
Under consideration.
But fundamentally, their deontological claims, as we tell you, are already descriptive. They call it deontology, but as we tell you, it's a deontological description of utilitarian claims. They just draw the cutoff line at random points. However, on side opposition, you can look on the deontological level if you even want to go there, and realize that we give you a totalizing claim. We give you multiple of them. First, we say that fundamentally responding with historic violence, with present violence, is always going to be bad, because you can't universalize violence. Second, that we tell you that you can't universalize revolution, because if you try to, there's nothing that you can revolt against. Even in their situation of one versus another, where there's only two actors, Adrian tells you can configure anything as two actors. Even beyond that, you're still overthrowing a previous social order. If you want to universalize this, you're right. You can't if there's only two actors, because one actor overthrows the other, and then you only have one actor. This is fundamentally unrepeatable, ununiversalizable. In their own example, they refute the deontological roots. So, where are you voting in this round? You're only going to be looking to utilitarianism, because not only does this always going to outweigh on the climate change link, because remember, as I tell you, extinction comes first no matter what. You can't make actor decisions if you're dead, and we tell you that fundamentally the only way to resolve for climate change is innovation, and they don't even test the link into innovation a single time. In general, they give you a lot of reasons why capitalist societies are bad. They don't give you many reasons why communist societies are good. We tell you that there's potentially something in between that could be the best solution, something like China that gives you poverty reduction on a utilitarian level and can solve back for climate change, because we still have the incentive for innovation. These things go clean conceded right out of the LO. Don't let them read new responses for it, or go for like this sort of theory argument, because let me brush on this right now. As Adrian tells you, there's literally no bright line for where they can call too fast. They don't tell us in the speech that it's too fast. They don't tell us before the round is specific words per minute that I can read in a case. Insofar as there's no bright line, there's literally no violation that they can read. There's not a place where you can pull the trigger to vote on. At the end of the day, you're always going to be casting your ballot with the opposition. Thank you.
Okay, I thank the LOR for their eloquent remarks, and I call upon the PMR to deliver a speech not to exceed 5 minutes and 30 seconds please, and close out the debate. Alright. Oh, you're gonna stand? Oh no.
I like my stand of books.
Yeah.
Just giving communist
Yeah,
revolution.
I've got my book, my calculus textbook.
Get rid of those materialist
Her,
stands.
her arguments are based on knowledge.
Yeah.
This is the innovation.
Problem for your advocacy is independent voting issue.
This is the innovation that capitalism gives you.
Okay. This is gonna be kind of crazy.
Oh god.
Jennifer Levine, last speech. I'm gonna talk about alt block, and then I'm gonna go into better issues. Okay, great. I will start my time now. So on the speed theory thing, I want to say that Everett asked Fleisler beforehand to go slow in this debate. Fleisler said, and I quote, "If you say slow, I will go faster." They did exactly what Everett said. They kept saying they concede this warrant and clean in the LO, don't let them respond to it. When of course Everett could not get to all of them because it was way too fast. top of case thing, like Adrian, like I think theory is kind of stupid. We have to mention it. I think this is important, like just kind of like on principle. Now on this idea about like what side opposition drops. We think they drop two things here. They drop that at least there is a chance that we wouldn't make communism like a reality for the global world, and they drop fulfillment of the poor, which we care about most. I'll get into that more on weighing. Then on this idea of contract theory, like one thing they basically say, like you assume like you consent to living in a government when you're born, you can't do that. When you're old enough to consider social contract theory, you can choose or not to leave. Like we think this just like is an irrelevant point. And then on this idea of Hegel's dialectics on like why experience is good, we tell you that infinite experiences sound great. We get closer to true good middle, the doctrine of the mean every time when you have more experiences. We think just like in general, like overall, this is a net benefit. Now on weighing, what are the voter issues here? Why are you voting Gov? One, deontology. Basically, you're weighing the principle that violence is always bad versus the principle that agency is always good. When Ott tries to tell you that violence is always bad, we agree when you're an individual, but we're talking about the collective global poor, meaning that violence as an individual act does not matter, the agency of a collective does. First of all, take efforts warranting that you don't necessarily have violence, and since deontology is about things that always happen, we can win here. Even if you don't buy that, you weigh violence versus agency, and you pretty simply understand that a false peace where everyone is non-violent because they're suppressed isn't actually non-violence, it's a suppression of agency. You clearly vote Gov here because acting on agency. Yes?
Let's think about like non-violence and suppression is like non-violence is actually suppression of agency, isn't it?
Let me go on the flow where I got it. I'm getting this from Everett's stuff about like violence and agency, because in his speech he compares the two, and so I'm just drawing that.
I don't see that on our flow, but just.
I see it online, to be fair.
Okay, under consideration.
Okay, cool. One sec, let me go back to where I am. Okay, great. I'll start my time now. So you clearly vote Gov here because acting on agency is the most important thing. It is a priority because every other part of philosophy, every other part of existence relies on agency. Non-violence in the like 0.000% chance that there is violence, like yes, it could happen as a result, but even like if it does happen, like sure, there could be harms. We don't actually care because dropping a water bottle could kill someone, but we still do it. Like since the communist revolution doesn't necessarily mean that like agency is restricted, it is justified under deontology, we win here. The claim we make is that agency itself is important, and that's never refuted, so you have to buy agency is more important than like maybe potentially stopping like a little bit of violence. Okay, second voter issue here is util. It's specifically justified for the global poor in capitalist societies to revolt. Go back to my first speech when I tell you that we're prioritizing the poor here. So if we can prove that we are improving their lives, if they think they are, then we are keeping this and we win this round. The thing we care most about here is not about how like productive the revolution is, it's about if the poor should do it. It's about like if the poor are justified in taking this action. We say they are justifying because capitalism is the worst possible scenario for them. Take all my words from the first speech and you can buy this. Under pragmatics, this idea, we get this idea about like anthropological arguments. Let's weigh these two arguments. In capitalism, yeah, like people are super aware of climate change, but like because super rich people are never going to stop polluting the world, it doesn't actually matter because even if in capitalism people want to solve for climate change, you don't get any solvency. On-site Gov, we tell you that actually when there's better community, because you can look into my warrants about why you get a better community. Yes?
I think this response on climate change is fair.
Which one?
Just the whole thing.
Okay,
The
well,
claim about why climate change is unlikely to be solved in capitalism is
and-
responding to warranting that was an LOC.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
it's more of an extension.
Can you tell me where on the
first-
flow it is for Gov?
What happened?
Tell me where on the flow it is for Gov.
let me see.
I'm pretty sure it's from the first speech when she was talking about harms to the environment.
Yeah,
It's
so
the
about harms
same-
to the
it's
environment.
It's more of an extension of that
When
same
people are
logic, if that makes
prioritizing
sense.
the anthropological
okay.
subpoint under why capitalism is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think this sort of warrants me like also the communism community is solving. for
Oh,
climate
that's
change.
that's straight from my warrant.
Yeah.
In let me find it.
Sub-point A of
There's so-
section D
there's
of
so much
point
stuff
5
here.
of the contention.
Oh, that's straight from contention 4 about like it allows people to be generous, giving to the poor, avoid the vices of selfishness, community. Like people.
But
are
that was like
trying to-
never implicated on climate change until like just now.
I
So
mean,
think
like that's extension of arguments.
But it,
Judge's discretion.
judge discussion, but I think that was like
Yeah.
within its.
We'll think
entirety,
about it.
like,
Okay.
domain.
They'll think about it. They'll think about it.
Okay. Great. Go back. Okay. Where am I? Okay, I'll start my time now. So see our warrants about why you get a better community in communism because people are less willing to stab each other in the back for a check. There's going to be a better vested interest in the future of the world. There's better climate change solvency on site Gov. This is an easy Gov ballot if you do want to think about practicality. I'll try to tell you that the applications of communism are going to be super harmful. I don't think this actually matters because we're talking about the justification once again. Any implementation doesn't really matter. But once again, like I think if there are literally no other available options here, like when you're poor, when you're starving, like when you have absolutely no agency, you have no choice but to revolt, and therefore literally anything where you are acting based on agency has to give you the better life. We're talking about the fulfillment of the global poor here, right? That is what we are weighing on here. And we say that anything in the case that you have agency and you're not like being forced to like work under the thumb of like the like giant invisible hand is going to be a net good, because we think that when you are robbed of your agency, you are stripped of your personhood, and we think that is the worst possible thing that can happen to someone, especially someone who is part of the global poor. So we think on this point about like pragmatics, if you do want to think about this, judges, if you don't want to think about any of the morality, we still think that we can win here, because we think that the worst possible thing that can happen to someone is depersonalization, dehumanization. We think that is the biggest thing that you're going to be voting on here, this point about how are people going to react, how are people actually going to get agency. The only way that the global poor get agency in either world is if they actually take action, if they do something, and that is by revolting. Most countries aren't in the United States. Most countries are generally poor, and most countries are actually going to be in great support of this revolution. Let's think about most people who are probably poor, who are going to be engaging in a direct response to the harms they faced in capitalism. On agency, on the idea that you only act on side gov, you vote gov here, because all of these people have no choice but to do that. So let's go over how we can win this debate. There are a few ways. One, on principle, we have this idea about deontology, about the principle of taking agency. Then on pragmatism, you can apply this idea of agency and how people are only going to be fulfilled if they're actually able to act as independent actors. And if they're just going over what other people are telling them to do, then they're not going to actually be fulfilled. And then finally, the last way that we can win is on this idea about climate change, on this idea about when you have a community, you have better solvency for these bigger world issues. We think that you're going to get a better net gain for the future of the world, for the future of the natural world as well as the human world. For all those reasons, could not be prouder to propose.
What a funny debate.
Awesome debate. Can you give us a few minutes?
Yeah, we sure can.
And by a few, definitely a few.
Are we shaking?
I'm keeping the recording on, so I'm just separating.
I was thinking about maybe preempting the thing.
Of you, after debating with all four of you, it was very fun to have the chance to judge you. I'm so happy you guys decided to do an exposition round and not actually do a competitive round, because I thought this was super cool, super educational, learned a lot of philosophy from Trinity friends. Very exciting. Okay, anyways, in the end, even though there's no actual winner, but how we would have voted hypothetically if this round did matter, this is a 3-0 decision for Op. Alright, I'll explain. I'll let Osh go first, because I promised her to go.
Yeah, my decision is not that long. But first it comes down to this question about framework. That's really what I'm thinking about the most in this round, at the very beginning trying to make my decision. I need to decide that first. I get this thing from Jenny, oh, this is, I need to, care about all these different frameworks. I actually should consider them all, because, how do we know what's right? We need to, respect other people's philosophies. That seems, somewhat valid. I think that makes sense. And then I get this one thing she says, which I write down because I think this is important. She says that they need to show that they win, that in more cases than not, under more frameworks than not, they prove that they win. And then later on, there's this response from Adrian that, obviously not all philosophies are equal. Some are really, really bad. And I agree. I mean, I'm not gonna say that they're all inherently equal. I'm willing to hear weighing on why they are or aren't equal. We get some of that from Op. Gov doesn't really do that. Gov just sticks with these four and doesn't tell me which one to prefer particularly, which is fine. But I do think that what they say in the top of case, the framework on PMC, it isn't necessarily what makes or breaks the decision. I do think it puts you in a bad position, because as soon as you lose two, you haven't really two of the frameworks at hand, you haven't won more cases than not. You're kind of automatically losing. So what that means is I think that there's at least two where I'm very, very confident that Gov is winning. First on deontology, I think that is that what I said?
Yeah, you said that.
Sorry, I meant Op. But yeah, I think that on the deontology, I think to me it was pretty clear that Op is winning. It ends just by the means. Warrant on agency just fundamentally doesn't seem, to my knowledge, to fit within deontology. I'm not really an expert on philosophy at all, so I'm kind of just interpreting things based on a basic elementary understanding. But to that understanding, I'm going off on deontology, and then on this social contract thing, I also buy you don't consent to living in a government. I fundamentally think that the social contract theory is probably pretty flawed, and it's not really a theory that I want to buy into. And so that means and also the other methods of recourse, if this obviously is not we haven't tried everything else, so if this is the last option, then I don't think we're doing it. So on those two, I'm already going off. So technically that already kind of solves the debate, and that allows me to kind of avoid some of the harder ones that I don't really want to think about, because they're more difficult for me to decide on. But I do think generally, even without even just generally, I'm probably you guys tell me that I can pick which one I want to consider most. In the top of case on PMC, it's oh, I get to pick what I like. I don't really like any of these philosophies, but I think util is better. So I'm probably gonna end up choosing util, because that's what I personally think makes the most sense for this round. Also, that's what Op tells me to care the most about. And on util, I think fundamentally a lot of what is said on Gov is not super interactive with this Red Scare from the US idea, because I think that kind of takes out all this you would have, it's even if it works in some countries, if it gets shut down eventually, I don't see how that's in the net better, because you guys end up talking about like, oh, there's a chance it works in countries where it's like 80% poor. I think that's probably like more true than the chance it works in like the US. But I don't know how that like solves it. It kind of has to work in the US for it to like work on the global scale. Also, I do kind of buy this the only way to solve climate change is going to be with like larger innovation. I think that's important. I feel like what we get on like how caring about each other and like is going to lead to like solving on climate change from Jenny in the last speech is really good. I did think it was kind of new though. Like I don't really know if like I felt like it was kind of too little too late to win Util. So because of that, like I was already voting off, and then that just kind of made me more strong in my decision.
All right. What do you want to do? Yeah. Okay. This is gonna be a little techie. But I feel like it kind of has to be. Okay, so I vote op. I'm comfortable in this decision. I think I'm really happy. Like I'm happy with how I vote, though I think I would have liked to vote Gov because I do think there's like I think that Gov in this debate is just an awesome side to vote for. But before I'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so first I start on theory. You guys don't tell me this, but like paradigmatically I evaluate theory before I evaluate case because you need to know the rules of the debate round, if I can speak really fast, if I can spread content, if I can have unlimited frameworks before you actually have the debate round. So I look to theory first. Get 2 theory shells in this round. The first I get from Everett, and it's like speed. This is bad. I give this some offense, and the reason I give this some offense is because I'm intervening against Fleesler. I love you. Stop spreading people out of the round.
Well,
So I give Everett some leeway on being able to respond to fewer things. I'm not going to vote on like every single drop point. And I also think but I'm not given a voter. I'm not like told to drop the debater, so it doesn't really matter. There's not an impact really, other than I'm going to give you more credit. Okay, and then the theory shall we get from Fleesler on voting. I don't know, is it, who ran it? If Fleesler ran it? Okay, yeah. Voting on one framework, I'm not voting on this. The Gov response is good, that meta-ethical debates exist in reality and they're important. So like, we can do it in a debate round because debate is reflective of life. And I also just like, don't want to vote there. And I'm not given a reason like why I should be voting there. Okay, great. So then after we've done the theory situation, there are 4 frameworks left in this debate. By the way, on the PO you call Everett, I think it probably is new. However, I'm not crediting the PO because otherwise I have no clue how to judge this round because I think I need layering. Like I need to be told why Util is more important than Dion or Dion is more important than Util or anything because otherwise I don't want to insert myself. I think I need the weighing. That's right. All right. So there are 4 frameworks. The first we get is Hegel. Okay, I actually think this flows Gov, which I wish you had collapsed on it. I'll explain why. Because I think the Everett response, which I was thinking of when I heard it out of Zach, and I was like, this is not a Zach thing to say, because you would never say, like, you weren't thinking of it. But you can't travel as a poor person. You're not going around the world. Like, this is because, not your time to speak. You can't travel as a poor person. So, okay, I buy that. And then I get the argument out of both Jenny and Everett that more experiences are good. I like the Adrian response where it's like, this is an endless cycle, like you never know where you end. But I also do buy like, the more you experience, the more of a median. And I do also buy the response, this flips in 50 years. So I think it is flowing Gov narrowly, but I think it is. Like at the point at which you do get more experiences, you get a better understanding of the world you want to live in. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that means for future generations, you have a better world like view, that we should be socialist rather than communist rather than, like, you get the point. All right, but I'm not told to prioritize this. I'm told this is like kind of stupid. It's kind of dropped in PMR. It's also kind of dropped in LOR. So that doesn't cast my ballot. The second thing we get is social contract. I'm told this is a bad theory by Adrian. I guess I buy Jenny's response that like you can leave when you're older. I still think I credit Adrian's response on like, even if you can leave when you're older, it's probably immoral when you're a baby. But beyond that, why do I care about security? Like, I'm not told, like, the impacts that I'm getting from Gov for why we hate this framework are not told to me, but like, are not solved for because security is the only thing. And I do think that's an accurate interpretation of the framework as much as I hate to do that. But also, like, I don't really care about the rest of the op mitigation because I don't even weigh the framework as that very important, so it goes away. That's probably me just being lazy and it being late, but the framework's disappearing from the round. Okay, last 2 frameworks, and these are the 2 that matter. The first is Dion. I think op's actually pretty cleanly winning Dion. I probably would have collapsed on it, but it's okay you collapse on Util. It's still okay. This is weird because I'm not as good of a philosophy debater as any of you guys, I learned from you, Adrian, and I don't know, and I know you're all better than me. So I was trying my best to sit here and figure out how to judge this. My understanding is that ops and interpretation is slightly better. I'm not sure I buy the understanding I get from Gov of Dion I don't buy Gov's understanding of Dion. I think, sure, you get more agency in your world. And I love the PMR response that if you don't have agency, you have violence, because that is violence being committed onto you. But I think it's new. They call the POO on that, and I wanted to give you credit for it, but I do think it's new. What I do buy from OP is that there is usually violence, even if it's not constant. So, the categorical imperative that if there's two groups you're destroying one, it can't go back, I just think is pretty cleanly flowing off. And then also beyond that, there probably is violence most of the time, even if 80% of a population is for this. So yeah, I probably flow this off. However, opposition tells me don't care about Dion, care about util. So I weigh util higher because of what Fleisler says, util's resolvable, the deontological claims are descriptive. I buy all of those. So I start looking towards util, and this is where I cast my ballot. Okay, util, I'm told climate change out of Gov and the risk of solvency agencies type of thing out of Gov. Okay, agency. I buy that risk of solvency out of Adrian is not worth voting on because I don't get probability weighing in PMR as to why this solvency is high. I think because I buy the response that okay, you could have solvency, maybe you couldn't, I need to be told why it's very, very, very likely you do get solvency, and then I would have maybe voted for Gov in this round. I also think that I get these alternatives from opposition, which are there are other things that you can do. And I think that's really wishy-washy and hand wavy and be you can vote different ways and that's gonna fix the poor's problems. But no one believes that. But it's enough for me to be okay, there's other ways to express your agency outside of this. The climate link change on Gov is good. I don't think it's as new as Asha thinks. I think it is in PMC. However, I think the extension of it and the solving of it is probably kind of new, and I also don't get enough of a probability to think that we do solve it. But the real reason I don't vote for it is because I think OP's just winning a whole lot more. And I think they're winning on the fact that the US is fighting back, meaning more violence, more people dying. And also I think this is one of the most stupid arguments I've ever heard in my life, but I credit you on the climate change in the middle countries and you're skipping the middle stage to go to the high stage. There's no way you made that argument, that you're saying the US is going to be a better situation than the middle countries. But whatever, fine. It's enough of a climate impact that it's competing that I would rather just vote somewhere else than US fighting back. I guess I also vote on innovation. I like Asha's ballot. I don't think the burden that Gov gives is extended. I also think that Gov, I was expecting a case, not that I didn't love your case, on well, the global poor has been oppressed. If you are oppressed, this is why you are justified in some sort of revolution, in some way, and I think that could have been cool. I really liked what you did, though, and I thought this was really fun to judge, and I love you all. Okay.
No worries.
Being recorded, people probably want to see my face. So
Yeah.
Okay, so mine is fairly similar. Okay, so I buy this at the beginning of Felisa's final speech that all this voter advocacy stuff, but it doesn't really change anything. So then there are these two competing frameworks. Gov tells me that whoever wins most frameworks wins, and I don't even need to consider the framework debate once I've decided that OP won at least 2 of the 4 frameworks. But I also end up deciding that OP can weigh frameworks as they want, because some are better than others, as Adrian points out, and that's just fairly obvious. But yeah, again, I don't end up caring because OP wins undervolved. So then on deontology, Adrian tells me 3 things in MO that win deontology. One, that it's not consequentialist whatsoever, and that deontological consequences are not grounds for deontological good, that it's sort of interlinked with the utilitarian arguments, so you can't really separate them. And 2, that the categorical imperative tells you that rebellion can't be universalized. And 3, that this global communist revolution will almost certainly involve violence, and even if there's a tiny, tiny percentage, it probably is not worth considering. Then there's the social contract, and I don't really buy OP's rebuttal here, and I probably would have flowed this through, especially for the whole winning 2 of 4 thing, because even though it doesn't seem like it matters that much, it's still 1 of 4, but then it gets pretty much just completely dropped. Then there's the dialectic, which also gets pretty much dropped, but I end up going with what Fleisler tells me about the time frame, and that in 1 generation you don't get any change, and then you're just back on the other side of the spectrum, and you just nothing really gets solved. And so then finally there's utilitarianism, which I'm told is the most important, and I go off there. So I buy up analysis that if everyone's dead, then the revolution doesn't succeed, so you don't buy Dion. I also buy that, like this whole climate change analysis, which is contingent upon the theory being dropped, which I'll get into later. And then I think that Jenny's response is probably new, unless I buy this theory thing, which I end up not buying, so yeah. And then there's the third and final thing, which is asymmetrical level of success. I think that I buy that governments are armed and will probably beat down some revolutions, and even then America steps in and whatever. So it's not like a guaranteed chance that it will succeed, but that doesn't really end up mattering as much for the justification of whether or not you should do it. So then the only thing that Gov really has is this fulfillment of the poor, and I buy that the poor might feel better standing up for what they perceive as right, but then it ends up getting outweighed. And Jenny tells me that the preservation of personhood is better, but I don't buy that people are just entirely dehumanized without a communist revolution in the status quo. And I would buy that a lack of agency has a really high impact, or at best through Jenny's analysis that a lack of personhood is basically the same as death, and it's a horrible consequence, whatever. But then I think that it's pretty new, so I don't really factor it in that much. So then the only way that Gov is really winning is on theory, and then I do believe that the spreading is bad, but no one ever told me to do anything about this theory except for excuse drops, and even if I excuse all the climate change drops and stuff in the final contention, I still think that op is winning the round. So yeah.
Alright.
Nice. Or security staff has asked us to leave, so
Let's go.
Let's go.